The title of my sermon this morning is He Would Never Be the Same. Will you? I'd like to start by telling you the story of a boy. He was raised in a rich family of power. In fact, the Bible tells us that his family were royalty. Josephus, the Jewish historian, actually said that he was of the family of Zedekiah, the king. So he could have possibly even been somewhere in line for the king's role in Israel. He had the best education that his nation could offer. He never lacked for anything. Everything that he needed was provided. He could not have had a better life. And one day, if not being in the king's role, he would be a leader in his nation. His life was great. But when he was somewhere between 15 to 20 years old, the most formative teen years in life, his life would change forever. A lot for the bad, but then really for the good. We actually find his story in the book that he wrote about himself, his own essentially autobiography in the book of Daniel. So let's go to the book of Daniel. Daniel chapter 1. This is what he said. In the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim, king of Judah, Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Jehoiakim, the king of Judah, into his hand, with some of the articles of the house of God, which he carried into the land of Shinar, to the house of his God. And he brought back the articles into the treasure house of his God. The king then ordered Ashpenaz, his chief of staff, to bring to the palace some of the young men of Judah's royal family and other noble families who had been brought to Babylon as captives. Select only the strong, healthy, and good-looking young men, he said. Make sure that they are well-versed in every branch of learning and are gifted with knowledge and good judgment and are suited to serve the royal palace. Train these young men with the language and literature of Babylon. The king assigned them a daily ration of food and wine from his own kitchens. They were to be trained for 3 years, and then they would enter royal service. Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah were 4 of the young men chosen, all from the tribe of Judah. The chief of staff renamed them with these Babylonian names. Daniel was called Belteshazzar. Hananiah was called Shadrach. Mishael was called Meshach. Azariah was called Abednego. Daniel's life was great. It was wonderful. It was all you could ask for out of life. But in a short amount of time, it was all stolen away from him. He was stolen away from his life, from his homeland, from his own family. Most of his family were killed. And now he's a stolen slave in a foreign country and forced to be a eunuch. He was forced to work for the very family who had done all this to him. For the very king, he was to stand in his presence. Living now in an evil foreign land, he would be put through 3 years of brainwashing into their religion and their culture. They even took his own name. Your name is personal. What your parents have given you when you were born. It's literally the only thing that you have left from your life. And even that, they stole from him. He had nothing left of his life or his home. Now I want to pause here just a moment in this man's story, and I want you to put yourself in Daniel's place. Take a second and answer these questions in your mind. knowing all that he had, losing it all, and where he's at now, a slave in Babylon, a eunuch being brainwashed. How would you feel? Would you be angry? Would you be scared? How about sad? Would you feel like God had failed you? How about these questions? What would you do? Would you fight? Would you try to just do your job to save your life? Just fine, let's just get this over with so I don't die? Or would you try to shirk from your abilities? Would you try to not get it all done, not be faithful? Would you serve faithfully? Would you be a good servant, a good eunuch for the king? I wonder if you'd think about running away. Would you be willing to join the culture of the people that have stolen you? What would you do? What do you think Daniel did? Most of you know by now what happened later on in Daniel's life. Daniel would become the right hand of the kings. And not just any kings. He served and influenced the 5 most powerful kings of the entire world during his time. Nebuchadnezzar, Nabonidus, Belshazzar, Darius, and Cyrus. He would serve them all faithfully, and he would influence their actions. This slave, this eunuch from a foreign land. God gave Daniel divine wisdom and understanding of dreams. And his wisdom that God gave him would literally change the world because of his influence. He helped make and pass laws and policies that glorified his God around the world. This foreign slave would bring his God into the situation, and that God would be the influence. Amazing. He even convinced King Cyrus, think about this one, he convinced King Cyrus to not only let his people go home to their homeland, but that he would raise taxes and take the tax money and pay the people to go home. What kind of influence Daniel had. God literally sent an angel to Daniel personally from his throne room. And that angel would give Daniel a divine prophecy that would take place from that point all the way until the end of time. Literally from God's lips to that angel's lips to Daniel's ears. How about this one? Did you know that Daniel was the head and trained the Magi, or the wise men that we call them at Christmas time, so that centuries later, when they would see the signs in the heavens, they would be on the lookout for a Messiah born in Bethlehem. That was Daniel's influence. We sing We Three Kings, but the reason they came, those Magi, to find the baby Jesus is because of Daniel's influence centuries before. So how did this slave, this eunuch from a foreign land, influence so much in the lives and kings that were around him? Well, the answer to our question is actually in verse 8 of the passage. We stopped at verse 7. So let's read verse 8. But Daniel was determined not to defile himself by eating the food and the wine given them by the king. He asked the chief of staff for permission not to eat these unacceptable foods. Now God had given the chief of staff both respect and affection for Daniel. But he responded, I'm afraid of my lord the king, who has ordered that you eat this food and wine. If you become pale and thin, Compared to the other youths of your age, I'm afraid the king would have me beheaded." Daniel spoke with the attendant who had been appointed by the chief of staff to look after Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. "Please test us for 10 days on a diet of vegetables and water," Daniel said. "At the end of the 10 days, see how we look compared to the other young men who are eating the king's food. Then you make your decision in light of what you see." The attendant agreed to Daniel's suggestion and tested them for 10 days. At the end of the 10 days, Daniel and his 3 friends looked healthier and better nourished than the young men who had been eating the food assigned by the king. So after that, the attendant fed them only vegetables instead of the food and wine provided for the others. God gave these 4 young men an unusual aptitude for understanding every aspect of literature and wisdom. And God gave Daniel the special ability to interpret the meanings of visions and dreams. When the training period, that 3-year brainwashing period, was over, the chief of staff brought all of the young men to King Nebuchadnezzar. The king talked with them, and no one impressed him as much as Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. So they entered the royal service. Whenever the king consulted them in any matter requiring wisdom and balanced judgment, he found them 10 times more capable than any of the magicians and enchanters of the entire kingdom. Daniel remained in the royal service until the first year of the reign of King Cyrus. That was 70 years of service in the throne rooms of Babylon. 70 years. After all of those terrible things had happened to Daniel. After him losing absolutely everything. Verse 8 says, "But Daniel, even though his life was now harder than it had ever been before, and absolutely everything in his life was bad, but Daniel determined not to defile himself. He made the determined choice that the world around him would not change him, but his God would. He was determined to stay faithful to God and make the most of every situation, even his current one that was terrible. He was determined to look forward to God's redemption. And God blessed him for doing so. Psalm 37 kind of gives a meager description of Daniel's life. In verse 23, it says, "The Lord directs the steps of the godly. He delights in every detail of their lives. Though they stumble, they will never fall, for the Lord holds them by the hand. Once I was young and now I'm old, yet I have never seen a godly person abandoned, or their children begging for bread. The godly always gives generous loans to others, and their children are a blessing. Turn from evil and do good, and you will live in the land forever. For the Lord loves justice, and he will never abandon the godly. He will keep them He will keep them safe forever. But the children of the wicked will die. The godly will possess the land and will live there forever. The godly offer good counsel. They teach right from wrong. They have made God's law their own, so they will never slip from his path. The wicked, they shall wait in ambush for the godly, looking for an excuse to kill them. But the Lord will not let the wicked succeed, or to let the godly be condemned when they are put on trial. Put your hope in the Lord. Travel steadily along his path. He will honor you by giving you the land. You will see the wicked destroyed." Daniel had a terribly difficult situation before him. But no matter the situation, he was given the opportunity to change his life forever. That seemingly small choice to not defile himself with the king's food became a foundation for the rest of his life. Every day, you and I are given choices, some small, some great, but they all matter. Even the small ones, as you can see in Daniel's life, were life-changing. Let me tell you another story of another boy who was about 15 to 20. He was raised in a good home to godly parents. His parents were even pastors. He was taught the Bible and he was taught how to live. He was taught how to live and know the difference between right and wrong. But some things happened to him that his parents never knew about. Those things led him down a terrible path of sin. He made terrible choices at an early age. He became angry and abusive to others. He would allow his temper to send him into rages. His friends at school didn't mind because most of them did the very same things that he did. But one night, his life changed forever. He was laying on his bed, and he was questioning if what his dad had said from the pulpit was true, and that God would punish sin ultimately. Or if what his dad was saying was just trying to make better people, and that the Bible might be a bunch of made-up stories just to make more moral people. If what his dad said was true, he knew that the life he was living would lead him into eternity lost, to be in hell forever. He thought about it a long time. He stared at the ceiling, unable to sleep for hours. Finally, as he thought about it, he said, if I ask my dad the truth, my dad will tell me. If it's just a bunch of made-up stories, he would be honest with me. But if God was really true, he'd be honest about that as well. So finally, the boy got out of bed and headed up the stairs into the living room where his parents were about to go to bed themselves. And he sat down next to him and he asked them the question, is God really real? His dad's answer it wasn't the answer he was expecting. It wasn't the answer that he would even think of. But his dad said, well, if God is really real, you can ask him and he will tell you the truth. If God's not real, then he won't answer. It was so profound. Why had the boy not thought about this beforehand? If God was really who he said he was, then he could answer. So that night, the boy got down on his knees and he asked the question to God, God, if you're really real, will you show yourself to me? That boy, his life changed forever. God answered and revealed himself in such a way that the boy never doubted again that God was real. But there was a problem, you see. Much like Daniel in this story, he lived around some really bad friends. You see, the boy in our story, he would go to school, and he had a lot of influencers around him that, well, he kind of followed along, and sometimes he led down a terrible path. But now he knew that God was real. So he went to school and he tried to do better and he tried to be a better person and more like a Christian. But, well, it didn't take until midday Monday when he was back saying the same things, doing the same things with the friends that he had done the week before. Then on Sunday, he would go back to church and He would ask God to forgive him of his sins and to forgive him of all that he'd done wrong. And he would feel bad and he would try to get it right at the altar. But then by Monday, the next Monday, again, he was back doing the same things. Week after week, it was the same. The boy got so angry at himself. He hated himself. Finally, he prayed and he told God that he couldn't do it anymore. He had to have an absolute change in his life, no matter what it was. He asked God to give him a new place to live, a new place to go to school, new friends, just start from scratch, wipe the slate clean. Bold, bold prayer that he didn't even know could be answered. But he was so sick of how he was living, he was desperate for anything. As he prayed about it, he felt that God told him, well, what about Mount Carmel High School in Van Cleve, Kentucky? You see, his parents had attended there years before. It was a Christian boarding school. It was definitely going to be a new start. It would be starting from scratch, new friends, new life, new place to live, the works. Well, it was a long way from home. Well, it was a long way from home, but God did answer that prayer. It meant that his life had to be completely different, completely changed. There at Mount Carmel, they had 2 revivals, one in the fall and one in the spring. And it was in the first fall revival, the pastor, Greg McDonald, was preaching, that Dan finally settled it. Yeah, the boy's name was Daniel too. And I'm sure by now you know that it was me. That I finally decided in my life that I was going to get it settled. Like the Daniel from the Bible, I was determined. At all cost, I was not going to be the person I once was. So I went to high school, finished it out 600 miles away from home. Hardest thing I'd ever done in my life. But it changed my life. Because like the Daniel in the Bible, I had now determined in my heart that I would never go back to who I once was. I would do my best to run from that life. I remember at that first revival in that meeting when I bowed the knee at the altar towards the center aisle, that a weight was lifted from me. And I knew that the chains that bound me, the sin that for years had kept me going back, I was now free from. And I left that sanctuary knowing that sin no longer had a hold on my life. I chose not to defile myself, and I chose that I was never going to be the same. Every class, every service I was in, I chose to soak in all of God that I could. The situation was not an easy one. I was a long way from home. I was making all new friends. I was literally living a completely different life than what I had even months and weeks before. But it changed me. You can see here in this picture, this was actually the revival where it took place. This was the close. It was a massive move of God's Spirit. And there we were praying for the pastor, Greg McDonald, who had spoke. We were praying for his ministry, which the Lord blossomed and grew. And the Lord has done wonderful things through him. But I was changed that day. We have been given each and every day the opportunity to change our direction. Sometimes it's small choices, sometimes it's great choices. Do you have the guts? Are you to the point in your life that you are sick of how you are living and you will be determined to defile yourself no longer? Well, you might ask, Well, yeah, but how do I do that, Pastor? Well, here's what I want you to do. I want you to get your Bible out and read it. Take pens, take highlighters, whatever you got to do. Every time you find something that you feel speaks to you, you mark it down. Every time you go to read, ask God to reveal His word to you. Every time you go into a church service, lean forward and take notes. Don't take notes necessarily of what the pastor's saying, but take notes of what God is saying to you through His words. Because in that you will see the way that God is leading your life and challenging you with new avenues of how to live. The book of Hebrews tells us that today is the day of salvation. Yesterday we can't fix. Tomorrow we can only hope for, but we may not have the time to do it. Today is the day that we change. Today is the day when we make decisions and we determine in our life that we will no longer live the same way. So will you? Will you make that determination today that you will never be the same again? I pray that you will. I thank you for following us and joining us online. I pray this sermon has been a blessing to you. But more than any and all of that, I pray that no matter where you're at in life, as an infant or an elderly, as a babe in Christ or a saint for centuries, I pray that you determine in your life right now that you will no longer defile yourself with what this world has to offer, that you determine in your life that you will never be the same as you once were.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me that you're getting a blessing out of it. If this video was a blessing, make sure to hit that thumbs up button for me. That way other people can find it as well. Here in the link section, you'll find playlists and new videos that we put out. We try to do 2 or 3 a week. You can also subscribe to the channel by pressing on my face and then hitting the bell icon, and that will alert you to new videos. May God richly bless you.